everybody! I hope you all had a good break and a wonderful Christmas. I am sorry I couldn't be here today to deliver the talk in person, but I had a dance rehearsal to go to for the show I'm doing on Sunday, so wish me luck. I'll see you guys all next week. We just learned what a parable is. It's sort of a story or moral teaching that Jesus used to illustrate the relationship between God and man. Some of them are pretty interesting too when you think about them. It kind of reminds me of a metaphor. Do you guys know what a metaphor is? Well, in my English class, we learn about literary devices, and a metaphor is a literary device. Basically, what it does is compares one thing to another in order to illustrate the relationships between the two. So it uses the familiar to describe the unfamiliar. For example, love is a red, red rose. It uses the familiar, a rose, to describe the unfamiliar, love. In the same way, Jesus used parables to help us understand something that otherwise would have been pretty confusing. I'm going to read a parable now, and I want you all to just stop and think a little bit about it and what it means in general. So this is Luke chapter 6, verses 37 to 42. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap, for the measure you give will be the measure you get back. He also told him a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, Friend, let me take out the speck in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. In this parable, Jesus makes a few comparisons. He compares us to blind people. How can one blind person guide another if they both can't see? Just like a blind person, we need Jesus or God to guide us because only Jesus can see the real truth. Compared to him, we really are blind. Another thing this parable addresses is how we judge someone else for their sins and their faults when we can't see our own. Jesus asks us, how can we judge others when we cannot see our own sins and our own faults? We must first learn to see our own faults before we can truly take the speck out of our neighbor's eye. Jesus' lesson in the story is about judging. He isn't saying that we can't see right from wrong or name a sin. In fact, what with all the teaching in the scripture, like the Beatitudes and the Ten Commandments, we have tons of references and teaching about sin and moral conscience to guide our actions. If we see someone sinning, we in fact should encourage him or her to do right and correct his or her mistakes. But if we can recognize the sinful actions of others, we should be able to recognize our own sins too, and we should be able to correct our own faults. That's a good thing. I said before, Jesus isn't saying that we can't name a sin, but there's a fine line between naming a sin and judging someone. What's the difference between the two? Do you guys have any ideas? Just pause me for a second, and I want to hear at least 5 or 6 examples before you start playing me again. Right. Well, naming a sin is a right and a duty that we have as Christians. It's part of our job to identify right from wrong and to challenge others to always make the right choice. So if your friend or family member is sinning, it's okay to point the sin out to them, kindly, in a loving way. That's the catch. Judging, on the other hand, is a bad thing, and it is something we should try not to do. Judging is when we judge someone for his or her action or appearance and associate those things with who they are as a person. For example, if someone looks different, you decide they're weird and you don't want to hang out with them. You don't even know them, and here you've already passed judgment on them. Here's another example. When I was in elementary school, there was this girl who was pretty smart, but sometimes she could be kind of a know-it-all about it. And that made some people dislike her. And for the next couple of years, no one was her friend, and almost the entire grade thought that she was annoying and a freak. I didn't like her either, even though I barely knew her. I was guilty of judging too. Then, one year, I was put in her class, and I realized she wasn't that bad. Sure, she had her faults, but everyone does, and she was actually a pretty interesting and fun person to be around. What I had judged was wrong. When people started going around and telling everyone that she was a know-it-all, she was annoying, they were placing her sin on her permanently. They and I made her sin who she was instead of what she did. But God doesn't create know-it-alls or freaks. He creates children of God who sometimes make bad choices and sin. You know that saying, love the sinner, hate the sin? Well, keep that in mind. Just because someone does something bad doesn't mean they don't deserve a second chance. So don't jump to conclusions. Don't judge them. Remember, Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me." So when we judge someone else, we are judging Jesus. And honestly, can any of you guys say that you're qualified to judge Jesus? Besides, here's another point. Has your mom ever told you this? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's actually some pretty good philosophy. How would you like it if you were always judged on the slightest thing? It wouldn't seem fair, would it? So just keep that in mind next time you're tempted to pass judgment on someone. You have to watch yourself. We can't judge other people truly. Only God can judge a person's heart. At the end of time, Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. That sound familiar? Yeah. We aren't going to be the ones judging, it's Jesus. By judging others, we put ourselves on the same level as God. And I feel I can safely say that none of us are on the same level as God. Remember in that parable I just read, it says a disciple is not above the teacher. By condemning others, we may set ourselves up to be condemned by God. Instead, when you recognize a fault in someone else, do what Jesus would do. As followers of Christ, we are in fact called to follow Jesus' example, responding to others who do wrong with love, compassion, and forgiveness. So encourage them to do the right thing, love them anyways, and forgive them. Then take a closer look at yourself and see how you could do better. And if you keep doing that, well, you'll ultimately be a much better person.